Jamil Smith, contributing writer for the Daily Beast, and Karine Jean-Pierre of MoveOn.org. And Jamil, you know, I get asked a lot, and I'm sure you guys get asked a lot too, what can we do? How can we get Donald Trump out of here? But the reality is Donald Trump won an election. It's very difficult to do anything other than elect a Congress that will constrain or impeach him, right?
Right. I mean, the thing is, people need to understand that what Donald Trump says is not nearly as important as what he's doing. And one of the things he's doing, of course, is trying to suppress the vote. This, this fraudulent election integrity commission is something that, frankly, all Democrats and hopefully all Republicans will start to stand up against. It's not enough to just send a tweet thinking that that's enough to resist white supremacy and white nationalism. You have to actually do the work.
And, you know, Karine, if you look at the map of 2016, you saw that Hillary Clinton won 487 counties. Trump won 2,626 counties. That's why that map looks like that. Now, of course, if you look at economic activity, Clinton's counties, they account for about 2/3 of the economic activity in the country, so they're bigger and they're more urban. But isn't the reality that what Democrats need to be focused on right now is voter registration and winning the 2018 midterms?
I think that's exactly right. I think we have to register voters. We have to, just like we're showing up at protests and we're showing up at town halls, we actually have to show up and vote as well. I mean, what's going to happen is Donald Trump and his allies are going to be thinking and hoping that we're too depressed, we're too down, that we don't have the energy to come out in 2018, and we have to show them wrong. And also one thing that I want to say, Joy, is that Democrats need to let go of Trump voters. We don't want them. They're shrinking voters. Now we know exactly who Donald Trump is. We can't argue with that anymore. And so we should just focus on our base. We should focus on brown voters, black voters, women, millennials. That is our base, and we have to inspire them, get them out there so that they can go out and vote. We actually have policies that are more popular than Republicans. Even in some red states, we have our policies are more popular than Republicans. So let's tap into that. Let's inspire our base. Let's invest in our base and get them out to vote.
And Jill, you know, it's pretty consistent that Donald Trump has about 36 to 38% of the population. Whether you go Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, 3 key states that Hillary Clinton lost, his approval rating is 34 to 36%. If you look at the congressional preferences from the new NBC Marist poll in those 3 states, Democrats are winning those, and GOP is getting about what Donald Trump gets. One more piece from the new poll: whether or not voters in those 3 states feel that they're embarrassed or proud of Donald Trump. The question I asked our earlier guest. Only 25% say that the presidency of Donald Trump has made them proud. How is it that Democrats can't figure out how to beat Republicans who are tied to this guy?
Well, I think part of the problem is that one of the things that Donald Trump is doing, and Republicans have been doing for years, is trying to de-emphasize the importance of government itself. They're trying to make people more apathetic as opposed to just suppressing their votes through voter ID laws and whatnot. So I think what Karine is touching upon is getting people energized. Democrats need to touch on issues that matter to their base. And right now, with this A Better Deal that they're proposing, they're trying to divorce identity politics from economics. That's exactly the wrong thing to do.
Yeah, and the other thing they're trying to do is talk about primarying some people. The vulnerable senators are Indiana's Donnelly, Democrat; Missouri's Claire McCaskill, Democrat; Dean Heller, who's a Republican; and West Virginia's Joe Manchin. Should Democrats be thinking about primarying those people, Karine?
I think Democrats need to focus on the base that they have and stay really clear and focus there and make sure that they are talking about the issues that matter. I mean, if there are opportunities there in the Senate, I'm less, confident that that we're going to get the Senate. I think we should focus on the House for sure, and there's ways to do that. There's a path.
Yeah, I think we're going to put up on, I'd love to put up on our Facebook page a little bit the line of succession. Even if Donald Trump was impeached right now, you keep going down that line of succession, guys. It's all Republicans until you get to Ben Carson at number 13. I'm just saying. Jamil Smith and Karine Jean-Pierre, thank you very much, guys. And thank you. At the top of the hour, taking the fight outside, what Steve Bannon's ouster at the White House could mean for the staffers still inside.
If you think they're going to give you your country back without a fight, you are sadly mistaken. Every day it is going to be a fight.
Welcome back to AM Joy. Steve Bannon is now going to fight his fight from outside the White House. Just hours after ending his tenure as Trump's chief strategist, Bannon was back at the helm of Breitbart News. "I feel jacked up," he told the Weekly Standard. "Now I'm free. I got my hands back on my weapons." He's got his hands back on his weapons. So who's going to face the fury of Bannon the Barbarian, as he's now calling himself? He's 12. So far, Donald Trump has been supportive of his former aide and the outlet that he runs, tweeting, "Steve Bannon will be a tough and smart new voice at Breitbart News, maybe even better than ever before. Fake news needs the competition. But sources close to Bannon say that he plans to take on the so-called globalists in the White House. Figures like National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster and Chief Economic Advisor Gary Cohn, both of whom have been facing the wrath of Breitbart in recent weeks. Criticism from the right, unfettered by the need to protect allies within the administration, would be a new challenge for Donald Trump. Because conservative media, from Fox News to the Sinclair Broadcast Group, which forces its TV stations to air White House talking points disguised as analysis, has consistently supported Donald Trump. But Trump's reaction to the events in Charlottesville scrambled the script. To be sure, some Fox News stalwarts came to his defense.
The president fought back. He did it in a big way. He let the media have it.
I don't think everyone that was part of that on Saturday were evil people.
I don't know how far they want to take it. Maybe they'll take it to certain books that they think are offensive.
But some were actually openly critical of Trump's equivocation.
It shouldn't be some kind of bold statement to say, yes, a gathering full of white supremacist Nazis doesn't have good people in it. Those are all bad people, period.
Charlottesville showed there may be limits to conservative media's support for Trump, which begs the question, is there an opening for Bannon to create a far-right media giant? Joining me now, Gabe Sherman, special correspondent for Vanity Fair, Jennifer Rubin, opinion writer at The Washington Post, Kurt Bardella, former Breitbart media consultant, and Sarah Rumpf, Republican strategist. Thank you all for being here. Gabe, I'm going to go to you first. The idea of whether Breitbart could actually build an alternate universe version that's to the right of Fox News. There's an article on DigiDay that talks about some of the troubles that Breitbart is having right now. They're facing traffic declines, advertiser blacklists, campaigns by marketers to steer clear of them, and even a petition within Amazon for it to stop providing ad services to them. There are just 26 brands appearing on Breitbart in May, down from a high of 242 in March, according to Media Radar, and that's even before the alt-right became directly tied to the Nazism and white supremacism going on in Charlottesville. One more little one. A site that's even to the right of Breitbart, InfoWars, has now been reduced to selling diet supplements in order to survive. Since 2013, Alex Jones, who is in touch with Donald Trump, a friend of his, has been pushing a collection of dietary supplements. All the display ads that are selling on InfoWars are dietary supplements. Can a right-wing media outlet survive if advertisers won't touch it?
Well, Joy, that's a very important question. I think the answer is whether you look at a right-wing media platform as a business or as a political project. And Steve Bannon was huddling this past week with his benefactor, billionaire Robert Mercer, in New York. And my sources close to Bannon say, yes, a TV venture, a media empire is something he is discussing. And, you know, whether or not there is a market and a business model to support that, clearly there is the political motivation that the Mercers have and Steve Bannon have to take this nationalist, economic, populist message to the broadest audience possible. And so I think you'll see in the coming days and weeks Bannon making moves. I already hear that Breitbart is going to restart its global expansion, which stalled during the time Bannon went in the White House. They're going to try to make this the biggest platform possible.
And Gabe, are you saying that the Mercers, and they are billionaires, they have the money, that they'd be willing to just go ahead and fund it at a loss, even if they couldn't get advertising?
I think so. I think, you know, the Mercers have contributed hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars already to Steve Bannon's various political ventures. You know, whether or not you see a return on that capital, it depends how you define return.
Sure.
I think without question, the Mercers have seen that their investments have paid off in the complete shift you've seen to this sort of populist, nationalist, white nationalist wing of the Republican Party. And so I think, you know, they will see another round of investment in Steve Bannon as a good use of their money.
Yeah, and I've always urged people to read the Jane Mayer profile on Robert Mercer. His racial views are very interesting, and his views in general are very, very far to the right. They're very Breitbartian. I want to go to you on this, Kurt, on Breitbart itself and sort of their reach, because people, you know, Republicans will say all the time when we interview them on TV, I never heard of them. I never heard of Steve Bannon. I don't know anything about them. This is their reach as of June of this year. 10.76 million unique visitors, which is down 53% from November of 2016. 2016. They ranked number 60 among U.S.-based sites, according to the Washington Post. And then just to put them in perspective in terms of scale, Fox News reaches 93 million households. Sinclair Broadcasting, which broadcasts the White House propaganda from Boris Epstein and forces stations to take it, reaches 83 million households. One American News, which Sarah Palin used to have a show on, reaches 30 million households. Breitbart.com, and it's apples to oranges, so it's not, it's kind of apples to oranges when you talk ratings versus users. They reach that 10.76 million. And little InfoWars, our friend Alex Jones, reaches 3.4 million unique visitors. So on scale, is Breitbart poised to be truly competitive with the much bigger outlets like Sinclair and Fox?
Well, I think right there you explain the rationale of why Steve is so interested in potentially going down the TV route, because there's no substitute for getting that scale of audience when you have the opportunity to be on television. And if you're truly going to compete with the Fox Newses and really what Sinclair has been doing and expanding into local markets, that you're going to have to be on television. And I think that you're seeing Steve continue what really started a year ago, which is, remember, before Donald Trump won this election, everybody was talking about the idea that if Trump loses, he will team up with Steve Bannon and start what we call Trump TV. And I think you're seeing now Steve continue that conversation, and he has the benefit of a billionaire on his side. And it's not about, I think Gabe put it really well, how you calculate what the profit is very, that's in the eye of the beholder. If you can impact change, if you can influence policy, if you can completely reshape a political party, that's worth a lot more potentially than any particular advertising revenue in any quarter of a year. And I think that's the key X factor. If Mercer's going to open up the pocket and cut big checks, they're going to be able to make some serious impact.
Let me ask you this quick to stay with you for a second, Kurt. What does Steve Bannon? What does he want? Is he ideological like Robert Mercer, or does he just want to make money?
Oh, I don't think it's about money. If that were the case, he would have stayed at Goldman Sachs all these years ago, and retired off of Seinfeld royalties. I think for Steve, he's laid it out very clearly. It's about destroying the establishment, destroying all the pillars that he believes have kept America in this globalist type of mentality. He wants to completely obliterate everything. Yeah,
he's a Leninist, after all, self-described. Sarah, let's listen to Corey Lewandowski, who used to be the campaign manager for Donald Trump. He was on Fox and Friends this morning talking about Bannon using this outside strategy and taking on Congress. Take a listen.
That gives him some more freedom to hold those individuals accountable who are not on the Trump agenda. And that's very important because a number of those individuals who are not on the Trump agenda are going to be up for re-election next year, and there should be accountability at the ballot box.
Themselves on the beach there. Sarah, one of the things Breitbart has managed to do is to reach a younger audience, obviously much younger than Fox. Are young conservatives hungry for that Bannonite message that Corey Lewandowski seems to think they are?
Well, I mean, if you look at the trouble that Trump had reaching Generation X and millennial voters, I don't know that that necessarily holds true. What Breitbart in the past few years has been good at doing is reaching that angry, disenfranchised, frustrated segment of the conservative population. When I hear, though, the president tweeting attacks against Republican members of Congress, what Corey Lewandowski just said, it just reminds me, Andrew Breitbart, the man who the website was named after, wrote a book in the year before he died, and he talked about what he called the Democrat media complex. He thought it was a problem for people like George Stephanopoulos in the inner circle of the Clinton administration, and then going to ABC as a journalist. The intersection between Democratic politics and the media he thought was corrupt and problematic, and the role of the new media was to shine a spotlight on it. The idea of using the site named after him to duplicate the same thing on the right, I mean, I'll leave it to your viewers to decide whether that's something that Andrew would have really wanted. But Larry O'Connor, who was a very good friend of Andrew's and who ran the Breitbart.tv for him, I mean, he tweeted again in the past few days, Andrew wanted to destroy the Democrat media complex, not duplicate it.
Yeah, so, really quickly, Sarah, just really quick before I leave you, Republicans your age, millennial Republicans, where do they get their news?
Well, I'm a little older than a millennial, but you know,
claim millennial status as long as you can.
You know, people under 40 are getting their news mostly online. So, you know, this is where the issue of what's spreading on Facebook, whether things are accurately, you know, accurate headlines, whether news is accurate and trustworthy, that is a problem.
Yeah.
And we've got a lot of intersection of pop culture and entertainment and politics and news, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, you know, there's some definite drawbacks to getting some of these issues mixed up.
Yeah, and Jennifer, you know, I asked that question because, you know, part of the power of these sort of new media outlets is that they can reach people outside of even Fox News as mainstream media, right? So do the people who oppose this spreading ideology really have, in your view, a coherent strategy to counter it?
I don't think they do. And remember how Breitbart and others operate. It's sort of an upward flow. What starts on Breitbart then migrates to Fox, then migrates to websites, then migrates elsewhere. So what they do is kind of generate these memes, these themes that then kind of infect the rest of the media. And pretty soon everyone is talking about their very odd spin on things. So I think what we saw in Boston is sort of a model for this. And the way to beat free speech that you don't like is more free speech. So I'll make a pitch to billionaires who have a social conscience: invest in real media. Invest in outlets that, in your local paper, for example, which has really been starved for resources over the years. So yes, I think the center and the left and the responsible right have to come up with a strategy for expanding the news that is accurate and is going to be responsible and help us recover our democracy.
Yeah, real quick, Gabe, is Rupert Murdoch worried about the competition from the far right?
Without question. You know, my sources close to the Murdochs say that he's very troubled by the Sinclair Tribune deal. In fact, one source said that that's why he pushed Donald Trump to fire Steve Bannon, because he saw Steve Bannon as being supportive of the Sinclair Tribune merger. And Fox News sees the prospect of a Sinclair-backed cable news venture, or just using their national reach through the broadcast stations they now control, as a real competition to Fox News's control on the conservative media in general.
All right, thank you very much.
And there's a lot of big-name talent on the sidelines right now, too.
Yeah, that's right, who have got to go somewhere. Gabriel Sherman, Jennifer Rubin, Sarah Rumpf, we're going to try to get hashtag Rumpf Don't Crack, because she is a millennial forever. And Kurt Bardella is going to be sticking around. Thank you, guys. And up next, reality sets in for one of Trump's biggest fans. Groups like avid conspiracy theorist Jack Posobiec, formerly of The Rebel, are still defending Charlottesville. On Monday, Posobiec complained that the media spent more time reporting on the white supremacist rally where counter-protester Heather Heyer was killed than on gun violence in Chicago. And remarkably, Donald Trump retweeted him. Now, Trump may or may not know who Posobiec is, likely not, despite the fact that the White House did give him press access. But we here at AM Joy, well, we're certainly familiar. So in the last 100 years, when would be the era? Because he says make America great again.
Where America came together to solve big problems. We talked about World War II. We talked about the Civil Rights Movement. Absolutely. Times where America put these divisions and this us versus them mentality aside.
Well, the Civil Rights Movement might not have been so unified.
You're right, because Democrat Lyndon Baines Johnson vetoed that bill 3 times before, while the Republicans passed it.
What?
And
No, the civil rights, no, he actually pushed the bill through. He didn't. Wow. Joining me now is Malcolm Nance, MSNBC contributor, and Kurt Bardella, former Breitbart media consultant. So we are sort of excavating our shame and having played a role in Jack Posobiec gaining a public profile. And Malcolm, it's funny because we put together this focus group. This was back in early July of last year. This focus group, I believe we recorded on July 11th. So it was before the convention. We put together a group of undecided voters and some Hillary and some Trump voters. And Jack tried to sort of take over the focus group. He kept talking and talking and talking. Everything he said was inaccurate. The man knows nothing about U.S. history, but he was very aggressive as a Trump supporter. Just in your view as an intelligence professional, you can be a professor if you want, would things like that tend to kind of put him on the radar. I don't know. What do you think of it?
Well, I think I know the question that you're asking. Would coming out, you know, he was sent to you as a representative of the Pennsylvania Republican Party, recommended as someone who would be good on that panel. But as we all know, he is a provocateur of the alt-right. I mean, his job is to go around and he creates conspiracy theories. He's the one who originated the Comet Ping Pong as child sex slave, you know, camp conspiracy theory that led to an armed SWAT siege at that place. He was one of the gentlemen who and ladies who jumped up on a stage at the play of Julius Caesar in New York City. And now he has a history of having been involved in the Macron leaks, which U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee and the FBI believes may have been a Russian intelligence operation to hack and release information the way that was done in 2016. So he's moved from provocateur onto someone who may have been complicit in a foreign intelligence operation while a U.S. Navy reservist with a top secret SCI clearance. You know, this is not going to bode well for his future.
And just to stay with you just for a second, and there's a, you know, this is a photo of him holding up a sign that says "Rape Melania." That is what the sign said. He went to an anti-Trump protest, and this was in January before the inauguration, and he tried to put it there to make it look like he was a member of the anti-Trump protesters. Malcolm, as you just mentioned, he was the guy at the Julius Caesar in Central Park play who was standing up and yelling and trying to interrupt the play. He's a guy who did Pizzagate. He promulgated the hashtag boycott Star Wars because it was too multicultural. I mean, this guy keeps popping up like right-wing Forrest Gump, and then you find out that he is a Navy reservist that used to have a security clearance. How could somebody with a security clearance, honestly, do all of these openly political activities, and then he eventually it got suspended, so he doesn't have it right now. Posobiec did tell NBC News that he was never given an explanation of why his security clearance was suspended, but he suspects it was because he had become more outspoken on Twitter. Are you allowed, if you're a Navy reservist with a security clearance, to do all this political activity?
Let me use this as an opportunity to talk to my brothers and sisters in the intelligence community and say, if you perform provocative political acts, whether you call yourself a journalist or not, and you hold the trust of the U.S. intelligence community with your top secret SCI security clearance, you will lose that clearance. I mean, they snatch clearances for things as innocuous as being late behind a month in your car payment. So Jack Posobiec, for all that's said and done, he has a lot more things going on in his life right now than just, you know, holding up the Rape Melania sign and being an agent provocateur for the alt-right. He is implicated in that Macron leaks, him and a guy by the name of Mike Cernovich. And that is being investigated by the United States government. The director of NSA, an agency which he would have received information from, has said that they were tracking the Russian hacking related to that, and that the Senate Intelligence Committee is looking for American citizens who may have fostered that Russian intelligence operation, and he was one of the people that created the hashtag Macron leaks. So, you know, for someone who holds a security clearance, do not get involved in these overtly political activities unless you just don't want to work in the community anymore, and that can be facilitated.
And, you know, Kurt, you know, there is this phenomenon of these guys who come out of nowhere and suddenly sort of rise to prominence, at least on the so-called alt-right, within that community, that sort of Breitbartian world. How common is it, and how do these guys actually make money?
Well, I think it certainly doesn't hurt when the President of the United States is retweeting your tweets about some of these things. I mean, talk about having the biggest audience, the biggest platform in the world, helping expand your name ID, your brand, your following. You know, these guys get attention, and I think about some of these people like James O'Keefe, remember the guy with all the videos and Acorn and all of that. You know, they seek out to create moments, to go viral. And then there are platforms like Breitbart and like Alex Jones who use their large followings and platforms to help make that go viral, to help get more eyes, the amplification of it. And as they do that, then a lot of folks in the mainstream media then pick up on that, and we end up talking about it. And, you know, it's just this kind of cycle. And they're always, I feel like, looking, it's like a reality TV show. They're always looking for that character that they can prop up, latch on to, become the target of ire from the media and from political figures. For them, they love it. Every minute that we spend talking about this, they're sitting there going, this is so great, it's working, we're driving them crazy, keep doing it, they fuel it. And it just becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in some ways.
And I mean, I guess, Malcolm, to a lot of people, they sort of seem like a joke, or they seem sort of silly. But this guy is set apart from those other people, right? Because of the job he used to have. I mean, this job he has and the security clearance that he used to have.
You're absolutely right. And, you know, everyone has a right to go out and participate in the political process. There are guidelines so that you don't violate the Hatch Act, so that you're not actually using your position of trust. But you have to understand, when you do provocative things, your behaviors will be looked at. And he lost his clearance. He says, you know, he says he didn't, but his clearance was suspended by DONCAF, the Navy Adjudication Authority for top secret security clearances, because there was reporting that said because he had leaked classified information on Twitter. I don't know whether that's true or not, but I can tell you this much. His behaviors are a breach of trust for all of the hundreds of thousands of people who hold a top secret clearance, who don't use their experience and training to go out and act as a political agent provocateur, which he revels in, as they said.
Yeah, and he's pretty belligerent in a focus group, too. I can tell you from personal experience. Malcolm Nance, Kurt Bardella, thank you guys. Really appreciate it. And up next.
I made the determination on Wednesday morning that life was too short to deal with jerks like this, and so we pulled the plug on having them use our service.
That was Matthew Prince, CEO of internet service provider Cloudflare, on his company's decision to terminate the account of neo-Nazi website The Daily Stormer. Cloudflare joins other tech titans, including Google, Facebook, Apple, PayPal, and Spotify, that have circled the wagons to close off spaces for white supremacist content to flourish online. This week, National Review columnist Jeremy Carl raised the alarm about these efforts, arguing that in America, we even let the bad guys speak and we counter their bad speech with better speech. Cloudflare CEO Matthew Prince and National Review columnist Jeremy Carl join me now. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
All right,
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. All right, let's start with you, Matthew. Cloudflare had actually come under a lot of criticism previously for allowing Daily Stormer and other offensive websites to be on your services, including for sharing the emails of people who complain about them with them, which in some cases led to harassment. You know, why was it okay to have them on using Cloudflare before Charlottesville, but not after?
Sure. So I think that it's important to understand what Cloudflare is. My guess is that the first time you ever heard of us was this morning, and yet there are 2.8 billion people that pass through our network every single month. We have over 10 million different websites and web applications that use our service in order to make sure they're faster and safer. And I think there's a key question about whether the actual internet infrastructure should be making editorial decisions about what content should and should not be online. In the case of the Daily Stormer, you're exactly right. About 3 months ago, we became aware that when abuse reports were being submitted to us, that they were then getting passed on to this, again, vile and repugnant site, which turned out to be run by pretty repugnant human beings who would turn around and harass the people that were submitting those reports. That obviously is behavior that is unacceptable and something that definitely put the Daily Stormer on our sort of probation list. But I think there's a larger question. Even if we terminated this site because the people who were behind it were jerks, does it make sense for CEOs of tech companies like me to be the ones who are making the call on whether or not content is good or bad, and especially if the technology companies are companies that, frankly, you've never heard of and are running the internal plumbing of the internet?
And Jeremy, you've written a couple of pieces for the National Review in which you decried these big tech companies, which do have the power, as you know, we just heard from Matthew. People may not even know all of the names, but you've got the people who run the servers, the people who actually register the names, like GoDaddy. You've got the people who run the hosting sites. You have all of this infrastructure through which websites and social media accounts pass, and you have said that you think it's dangerous for them to be denying access to people like like the Daily Stormer. And just to run through, Uber has said, you know, people who are Nazis cannot ride in their vehicles. Gizmodo has reported that Airbnb has told, you know, people who are neo-Nazis who are traveling to these rallies, you can't stay in an Airbnb. You've had GoFundMe and Kickstarter, so you can't raise money for people like the guy who drove the car into Heather Heyer. You've gone on and on and on. OkCupid banned crying Nazi Chris Cantwell, said he can't like find dates on OkCupid. You think that's dangerous? Why?
Well, I mean, obviously the Nazis are the hardest case, and I think it's important to sort of say, you know, I don't think Matthew is the bad guy here. I'm much more critical of some of the other tech major CEOs who've really been kicking out a lot of these groups that are not just Nazis, by the way, but, you know, other folks who have unpopular political opinions with no due process, with no free speech. I mean, Matthew has essentially said, I shouldn't have that power. I'm worried about that. I don't think we made a decision that was on due process, and we need to have one. I'm sympathetic because the Daily Stormer is literally, I mean, they're cartoon Nazis. I mean, to such an extent that even other white nationalists and white supremacist group often accuse them of being a government plant. So, as I think Matthew said, the hard case makes bad law. They're a hard case, but there are a lot of people who I don't think are hard cases. They may have objectionable speech, they may have offensive speech, but they should have a right to be heard. And unfortunately, because of the arbitrary decisions of a few tech CEOs, we're not getting the right to hear those voices.
But Jeremy, you've gone farther than that. I mean, the idea that you think some of these private businesses, because typically people think of conservatives as being in favor of business running unfettered from the federal government and being anti-regulation. But you've written about the federal government, who you generally think overregulates businesses, coming in and regulating businesses like Matthews as utilities.
Yeah, well, and I think it depends, and I want to be very careful about that because obviously, as a general rule, I'm A, wary of giving government power, and B, wary of regulation. But I think, as William F. Buckley said, it's a difference between pushing a little old lady out of the path of a speeding car and pushing an old lady into the path of a speeding car. Those two things are not equally objectionable because one pushes little old ladies. I think in this case, the real key issue is the question of monopoly and access. If you have a market in which there's 10 or 12 different companies serving it, and I have a lot of choices, and one particular company makes a choice not to serve me, I think that's one thing. When you have Google or Facebook with 80+% of market share and unique access to a couple billion people, and they're sort of arbitrarily kicking people off their platforms and denying speech, I think regulating a monopoly or regulating a completely market-dominant company is a very different thing than regulating in a competitive market.
Are you for net neutrality, just to gut check?
I have not taken a personal position on net neutrality. Net neutrality just, there's so many other things implicated in net neutrality, whether it be the favoritism of certain types of content, whether it be cracking down on piracy, et cetera, et cetera. I think the baseline thing about net neutrality, though, and I think unfortunately a lot of the hypocrisy we've seen from the left on this is net neutrality to me should have been foremost and has been rhetorically foremost about allowing free speech. But then we saw as soon as these bad guys were speaking, all of a sudden a lot of people who'd been really advocating for net neutrality said, hey, no problem with kicking those guys off.
Right.
There were some notable and honorable exceptions. Electronic Frontier Foundation came up with a very strong pro-free speech statement. But I think there's a lot of folks like Al Franken who said this is the great First Amendment issue of our lifetime. I've seen crickets from him about allowing unpopular political speech in the wake of this.
Matthew, do you think businesses like yours should be regulated like utilities by the federal government?
I think that the thing that's hard to appreciate if you're someone who's watching this show is just how international our business is. We have customers in literally every country around the world, and almost the entire internet population is using our service. Well, I think that it's difficult and dangerous for any one country, even the United States, to say that it's going to regulate the internet. What I do think is important is that there needs to be something along the lines of due process for when CEOs like myself or other CEOs that are running major tech companies are thinking through the process that they are thinking through on terms of what content is allowed and not allowed on their system. And what I mean by that is there should be some transparency, there should be accountability, there should be consistency. While ideas of free speech, and I'm a huge free speech proponent myself, you know, the son of a journalist and someone who spent, you know, his childhood talking about the importance of the First Amendment around the dinner table, I think we have to acknowledge that that isn't a universally shared belief around the world. Cloudflare operates actual physical infrastructure in about 70 different countries, and we need to make sure that we follow the laws with all of those.
Yeah, yeah. In Germany, for instance, you cannot have swastikas or statues of Nazis. Interesting difference between U.S. and there. Matthew Prince, Jeremy Carl, thank you guys for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. And coming up, thank you. And coming up at the top of the hour, the head of Donald Trump's National Diversity Coalition addresses Trump's statements on Charlottesville. But up next on AM Joy, a surprising show of support for Colin Kaepernick.
One of the great things about getting out of the newsroom is it gets me to places that, you know, maybe a lot of our viewers haven't traveled to. But I've got to try to make those connections and try to understand what unites us. But also, I have a chance to put you in somebody else's shoes. Have you accepted that he's gone?
He is always going to be alive in my heart.
If I can get you to stand in another person's shoes in another part of the country, I think it helps. It's important, if you're going to be a reporter, to really understand people, and that means all people.
During our Made to Move 2017 clearance event,
host of Make It Plain on Sirius XM Radio, and Mike Pesca, Slate podcast host of The Gist. Thank you guys for being here. I want to show you guys some pretty remarkable video that came to us via New York One, and this was, I believe, yesterday. This is dozens of current and retired police officers from the NYPD rallying in Brooklyn on Saturday in support of Colin Kaepernick. Take a look.
We support Cap! We support Cap! We support Cap!
As members of law enforcement, we can confirm that the issues that he is saying exist in policing and throughout the criminal justice system indeed exist.
We have to tear down and be honest about this discussion. All of the people behind me risk their lives, so to speak, to protect folks. And they are standing with Kaepernick because they understand how important it is to push back on this structure.
And that is New York Councilman Jumaane Williams, who organized that event. Your thoughts, Mark? I mean, these are police officers standing up for Kaepernick.
Well, first of all, morning, Joy. And not only that, you have white players who are joining other African-American players. Justin Britt and the Seahawks supporting Michael Bennett. Chris Long supporting the Eagles, supporting Malcolm Jenkins. So it's growing, just like there were whites demonstrating counter-racism in Boston on yesterday. It's growing. We had no idea it would grow this much, but some of us, myself, Reverend Stephen Green, Jamal Bryant, the AME Church, NAACP Color Change Women's March, we're going to have a rally at the NFL headquarters this Wednesday, the 23rd at 5 p.m. to say to the commissioner, to the NFL, that they also need to support Colin. He's no different. A lot of people at first didn't support Jackie Robinson and Curt Flood and John Thompson when he stood up for Proposition 42, and Juan Carlos and Tommy Smith and Muhammad Ali, for God's sake. Yeah. And all those people who didn't support them ended up having to apologize later. The NFL should not wait to be sorry later. They should be on the right side of history now and support Colin Kaepernick.
And Mike, is it that open and sort of cut and dry within the NFL that no team wants to sign Colin Kaepernick literally just because he protested the national anthem?
It seems that you could make that conclusion. The Guardian did a study of political donations of NFL donors from 2015 and 2016.
Of owners, yeah.
Owners. They gave $8 million to Republicans and less than $200,000 to Democrats. Now, America's not a monoculture. So this idea that Colin Kaepernick is divisive, period, or is a distraction. I mean, he was also the #1 jersey sold, right?
Yeah.
And they are promoting a survey that shows that he's the #1 reason ratings were down, but ratings weren't really down after the election.
Yeah.
The funny thing, or the interesting thing, when you listed all those athletes who some people were against and some people were for, and maybe Americans don't really really recognize a couple of those names, Kurt Flood, the two runners from the Mexico Olympics, but they remember Muhammad Ali. And they remember the athletes who were great. And in fact, athletic greatness will transcend all of this. And that's the significant thing about Marshawn Lynch, or especially Michael Bennett, a great player kneeling down, Chris Long, a very good to great player joining Malcolm Jenkins. If you get these great players saying we're essentially on Kaepernick's side, I think it'll change the discussion a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, at the college level, the collegiate level, when you had football players refusing to play unless there were significant changes in some of these administrations, that's when the teams took notice. Do the NFL players have that kind of leverage, though, in terms of their contracts? Both of you guys can handle that.
Well, that's always been a challenge, and they've not historically had that kind of leverage in the past. But what happened just this week, the NFL Players Association came out and made an emphatic statement that they are going to do more to support Colin Kaepernick. And I think that's important. You know, take a page, borrow from the WNBA. The WNBA Players Association supported its players this week. They all locked arms. The Los Angeles team, the Washington Mystics, the Sparks of the Mystics locked arms after what happened in Charlottesville. And the league supported them. The Players Association supported them. So I think they ought to take a page maybe from the women and do the same thing.
You know, there were members of the St. Louis Rams who did a Hands Up, Don't Shoot protest. This was back in 2014 in St. Louis. They took a lot of heat for that as well. There were no immediate repercussions in terms of their careers. Has there been backlash internally on these teams? Have players been punished, essentially, for taking stands on Black Lives Matter?
The teams don't want a distraction, and that's both legitimate and illegitimate. And you could say, I mean, the owners of the Cleveland Cavaliers could say that LeBron James was being a distraction, but he inherently can't be. He's LeBron James. I really do think that how the NFL works, it's the #1 cultural product in America. And if you want to do a number of shows like we saw Undisputed there, if you want to do a number of shows talking about how society is breaking apart and the NFL demonstrates that, you can. And if you want to do the other side of the show and say the NFL is exemplifying the exact opposite trends in society, you can. It's the #1 most unifying thing. The odd thing is that the owners are, I think, outside of the mainstream of society, and some of their decisions, based either on perception or their own politics, some of their decisions are hurting their teams, because Colin Kaepernick is certainly one of the 50 best quarterbacks on the face of the earth, and there are, I can think of half a dozen teams, a couple teams he could probably start, and a half a dozen teams who would greatly benefit. So if their whole thing is, all we want to do is win and not have a distraction, putting this excellent player on the roster might serve to win. If he accounts for one more win than he would have once your starter gets hurt, then what team won't rally around him saying, oh, we love Colin Kaepernick?
Yeah, and either way, his jersey is now going into the what they call the Blacksonian, the Smithsonian Museum in D.C., which is, so you can still see his jersey. I want to sort of do a turn, guys, because we know that Dick Gregory passed away yesterday. For those who are unfamiliar with Dick Gregory, I'm going to play a little bit of a soundbite. He goes all the way back to the civil rights movement. He's a comedian. He was an activist for nutrition, all sorts of things. But this is a little piece of him. He had marched with Martin Luther King Jr. And against school segregation in Birmingham, Alabama. He was sentenced to 180 days for parading without a permit, which was a common way to get people in trouble back then. And so here he is as an event, and he's teasing Dr. King about the difference between the sentences that they two got. And Sammy Davis Jr. is also in the audience for this, so take a look.
And as I have expressed to Dr. King, the reason I'm not going to do my 180 days because I can't see them giving me 180 days and only giving him 5, and he started it.
I love seeing video of Martin Luther King Jr. just as a human being and not like an icon, just being a guy. What did Dick Gregory mean to you? Tell those who are unaware of him about him.
Well, what he meant to me was when I first started in radio in my 20s, Kathy Hughes put me on the air, and I was so serious. You know, I was Malcolm X, too serious. She hired Dick Gregory to be my co-host, and we became close friends, and he was the first phone call I got every morning. I managed to make it to the hospital last night to be there right after he passed and be with the family. But what he really means to us, Joy, you and I are sitting in 2 chairs in NBC at 30 Rock. We're here because of Dick. Jack Paar invited him on the Tonight Show, and Dick said, I'm not going on because you don't let Negroes sit on the sofa. And Jack Paar changed the policy in the studio just down the hall. And Dick Gregory was the first African-American to sit on the sofa in the Tonight Show. And so we owe Dick that. Our thoughts and prayers are with his family. His son Christian has an enormous task. How do you organize a homegoing celebration for someone who celebrated all of us and was such a source of joy? We're so thankful for him, and I'm honored to have been by his side.
Yeah, your thoughts, Mike?
If there was a Mount Rushmore of American comedy, the two comedians that every other comic working today would put on there are Richard Pryor and George Carlin. And Richard Pryor says he essentially owes his career to Dick Gregory. I think comedy ages less well than any other art form. I mean, if you hear Billie Holiday today sing Strange Fruit, it affects you. So when we go back to '61, we might not realize how funny he was, but he was transcendent, he was funny, and he was there at so many historic